Hello and welcome to another episode of News of the Week. And this week is kind of like a little different because I just wanted to acknowledge that two of the most controversial people in the media and what they called the news media, I never really felt it was the news media, got fired on the same day last week. And normally we talk about investing in banking and money and currencies and all that kind of good stuff. But I believe this is an important thing to raise and point out. Number one, I mean, with a little bit of a smile, you would say, okay, well, even the people at the very top can get caught is maybe the wrong word, but can lose their job, even though they made millions and millions of dollars while they were in it. And when they were in it, you would normally say, okay, what makes somebody do a good job? And that is when they have valuable information, when they have a good way of communicating, if they are a great interviewer and stuff like that. But when it gets to the point that you're basically being fed an ideology, when the whole purpose of coming on in the media, on TV, in speeches, in YouTube and in other stuff, is to pound the pavement for a specific ideology, then the whole thing can get very dangerous. And I would recommend, by the way, for anybody, I've always been a big fan of Bill Maher, and he has had this Real Time with Bill Maher show forever and ever, and you can also get it on YouTube and on the internet and so forth. And this week, on April 28th, Bill Maher interviewed for the first little short segment Elon Musk on his show, and they talked about something that is called the woke mind virus. And what is really kind of the woke mind virus in a sense is where certain things are being excluded, and to the point excluded that it's not just in, under certain circumstances, you're not supposed to say it. You're not supposed to be offensive or yelling around, for example, during a wedding. You don't want to really raise political topics when you come together as a group of people who want to celebrate something, some event, some achievement, and so forth and so forth. So politics has its place, aggressive cheering has its place, and a certain decorum has its place. So that's the one thing. But when it gets to the point where you use the name of a person, and that person's name immediately is associated with you agreeing or disagreeing with a position without even having said it, right? Like some of those topics, names, I mentioned Tucker Carlson and Don Lemon, they were at the left and right extreme of this agitation and ideology stuff, but there are other things too, right? If you say transgender today, or you're basically using certain terms in the context of women, or certain terms in the context of technology, especially artificial intelligence and so forth, you are immediately categorized. And these two characters were basically the conduits for that. Anything and everything, when they used the term Fox or Fox News, immediately the ideology was attached to it, meaning basically there is nobody good, they never do anything good, and vice versa. When the Fox people mentioned CNN or any of their people, it was the same thing. They didn't even really need to say anything more. They just brought more and more and more examples to support their ideology. And what happens to us as the consumers, and I have actually for quite a while already stopped looking at the news or any of those channels, left or right. I'm getting most of my information nowadays by my own choice, mainly through YouTube and through my own research. But fundamentally, what I believe is so dangerous and why I wanted to raise it in the news of the week, especially for this kind of what makes me a laugh and cheer event, is that there is a huge risk that the ability to come together to accomplish something together, which means compromise and letting go to some extent of what you believe or what you're thinking is the only way to think about, to let the other side in a little bit and hopefully find compromise, that ability goes further and further away, the more we're dividing ourselves into camps. And the one thing that is in this context relevant and why I wanted to raise it is, yes, the event itself was pretty surprising and maybe a little bit of a sign that there's an end, even though I think the reasoning why it actually happens has nothing to do with the left or right ideology. There were other reasons in the background, but it elevated the point to say, why are we so divided? And why does it feel like we are dividing further and further? And I believe it is important for every single one of you listening to me or watching to ask yourself, what are the things that trigger you to decide I'm only for this, I'm definitely against that? And what are the things that you believe you were in the past potentially able and willing to compromise on that you no longer are? What does this mean in the bigger context of our investing? Well, think about it. I wrote articles and made videos about de-dollarization. Why is that happening? Because the world seems to go from what used to be globalization and everybody trying to benefit globally from the advantages of, like, for example, low wages or technology advantages or the ability to make things in different places and bring them all together in one place to assemble and then sell and then use. That seems to go away. And we are basically going backwards towards building camps where everything that the other side of, the so-called enemy is doing is another reason to say, oh, look, that's the enemy. And that goes for money. More and more countries in the world. Just this morning, Argentina is now trading with China using their yuan and no longer the dollar. Why? Because they are afraid that the dollars may be frozen if they do anything wrong due to the experience with the crisis in Ukraine and Russia. So money is affected by this. Everybody who is not with me is my enemy, right? Then the way we need to diversify our portfolio is affected. The way the government in some cases now with the newest craziest thing, also something that came out this week and will go into effect on May 1st, is that under certain circumstances, somebody with a better credit score, something around 720 to 780, is going to get punished in a sense to having paid more for people with a lower credit score. Who in any right mind in the government thinks that's a good thing to keep and unite the community and bring people together? What will you do? You will basically say, well, if I'm below, then finally the government is doing something to me because rich people and people with high credit scores are my enemy and vice versa. So everywhere in life, we seem to be building enemies and building camps of the left and the right, the up and the low, the rich and the poor, and so forth. And I really wanted to raise this as part of the news of the week, especially because we have an example that the people that have vilified each other, these two anchors in these two news networks, were, by all intents and purposes, at least ideological enemies, and now they're both gone. But is it going to remove the ideological wars and the mind virus that we seem to be exposed to? I don't think so, but I want to trigger you to ask yourself, where are you in this? I believe personally, I've always been in the middle. I've always been open. I always want compromise. I want to accomplish a goal. And anybody who can help to accomplish the goal is welcome. But it seems like we're going into a world where you can only actually pursue a goal when you have the right ideology of the people that you want to work with. And that's really not a good world, in my opinion. So think about it. The news of the world made me smile, especially because it cut across both extremes of the spectrum. But we should reflect and ask ourselves, where are we ourselves? And more importantly, it's not just where you stand, but what are you doing to come together, compromise, and reach your goals? So until next time, be well, stay safe, and have a good week.